today we have Sam Lewis. I'm delighted to say he is with me today. He is editor of Care Home Professional. And for any care provider out there that wants to think about elevating your profile and reputation nationally as an expert in provision of great care and everything that comes with it, then being seen and noticed in the press is one way to do that, which is why we're going to be digging in, or Sam's going to be sharing his secrets, opening up about how to pitch to Care Home Professional. And I tell you now, the same principles to Care Home Professional will be similar to many different outlets if you are a care provider and wanting to pitch to the press and become seen and recognized as an expert for whatever reason that may be. So we'll be kicking off this episode with Sam in a few moments. But before we get going, as I say, my name is Adam James of Spring Up PR, and make sure you go and listen to all previous episodes. It's packed full of great tips and advice for PR and marketing to help get more inquiries, particularly from self-funding families, or recruit great dream care teams. And if you would like a free video on the vital things you must be doing in order to get more inquiries via PR and marketing, head over to springup-pr.com, and there you will see somewhere where you can get a copy of that free video. So make sure you do that. Now, without any further ado, as they say, I'm delighted to welcome Sam. Sam, hello. Why don't you start off by telling everyone a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, hi Adam. Thanks for the kind words. I'm Sam Lewis. I've been editor of Care Home Professional for a relatively short time. It's been about 6 months. I've been working in sort of trade publications for over 3 years now, and it's sort of very similar principles that have to be applied across different industries. From what I've done before, care is definitely, I didn't know if this was going to be the case when I started, but I've definitely found it more interesting and have become more passionate about it than anything that I've written about before. And that's just in the first 6 months, really.
That's great. Well, welcome slightly belatedly after 6 months to the set. And I'm sure many care providers listening will be familiar with you, and of course they're going to be very familiar with Care Home Professional magazine. So let's get straight in, Sam. If I'm a care provider and I'm wanting to get my name out there, be recognized nationally, have my wonderful care team recognized as a great provider of care and a great place to work, how can they start pitching stories to you?
Yeah, firstly, I'd just say, there's obviously two ways you can go. You can go with national press. You're going to be seen by everybody. It's not going to be it's a very difficult place to get your stories published unless there's only a very small number of the sort of kinds of stories that come from care that end up in the national press, and it tends to be the more negative ones, unfortunately. Luckily, on the sort of B2B side, business to business, or on like in trade magazines such as Care Home Professional, we are much more specific, and so we have much more scope to write about all different kinds of stories that come from the care sector. So there's a bunch of different stories that we would cover. We are a business magazine, so we tend to focus on the business side of things. So I would say we would avoid stories perhaps such as, specifically ones to do with like residents. So maybe if a resident we get some lovely stories through, but unfortunately because they're not business related. So it might be if a resident is taking up gardening or something like that in the care home. Lovely stories like that come through, but we try and keep it focused on the business industry side of things. So the way you can get in touch, and firstly, I would urge everyone in the care sector to get in touch as much as possible. That would be my overriding message, would be it's a great way to get your stories out there, sort of market yourself, because even though you are marketing yourself to the sector, and so not specifically to people who are looking for care beds, maybe it's a great path to sort of becoming known as an expert in the sector. And so many people don't think to do it. They don't think of it as being an option. Maybe they wait for us to get in touch with them, but as a journalist, we're always just ecstatic if somebody brings a great story to us, and that can be a few different kinds of story. When I say story, it might just be a news story, which might end up on our website. It might be this company has bought this company. It might be X care home provider is opening a care home there was one about a new care home being built in Whitby today, I think. It might be a new CEO. It might be care homes have been sold or bought, these sorts of things. It might be financial results or research that you've conducted or work that you're doing in a new partnership with a charity. There's so many different kinds of story, and I would just say send as many over as possible. The best way being by email. I'll say it now and I'll say it at the end as well. My email address is sam.lewis@itppromedia.com. But yeah, there's sort of straight news stories. We also do interviews with providers big and small. It doesn't have to be somebody at Bupa or somebody, another massive provider. It doesn't have to be a Martin Green. It can be big or small providers. We also like guest pieces, if that's sort of your thing. If you would rather write than feature in an interview, we would also take a guest column. And yeah, so the other thing I wanted to go through was there's also, I've obviously mentioned there's lots of different kinds of content that we love to get from people in the sector, but there's also a certain way that will make us most likely to pick up your content, because we get so much through and it's quite a small team, so we can't put up 20 news stories a day. It's sort of 5 every morning, and then we're on to the print magazine. So it's a limited scope, and I just wanted to present the best way of getting those across to it in the best sort of format. So the first would be to make sure, and I've touched on this a little bit already, but just to make sure that it's relevant content.
And by that, for those listeners, I just want to emphasize as well, what we are talking about here is editorial content. We're not talking about advertisement, we're talking about editorial content, news stories.
Absolutely.
Where for Sam, my background is a journalist too, and I know how important it is. I know that the one thing that Sam wants above all else is a good story, correct? And then
that is absolutely right.
It makes his life so much easier.
Yeah, I was saying before we went live here, in my mind, there's sort of two places we get content from. We get content from people who work with us, which would be suppliers. But really, to my mind, the journalistic stories, the interesting stories, we're not taking any payment for them. They're coming from social care providers like your listeners. And we just want interesting news that care providers like your listeners are going to want to read. So yeah, like I said, new CEOs, departing CEOs or other execs, care homes are being bought, sold, built, closed, or even just like care homes that are being planned at the moment to be built, finances, wage increases. There's lots of good stories on people introducing real living wage and stuff like that. That's such a big story in the care sector at the moment, just because of how poor wages do tend to be across the board, unfortunately. So when a company says, you know what, we're taking on the real living wage and we're doing it in advance of it, actually, we're taking on the new real living wage that hasn't even been introduced yet, it's coming in 6 months. That's quite a big story, and people who work in the sector really want to hear about that because they might think that might be a good place to work in the future. So yeah, when you're sending stuff across, sorry, go on.
Yeah, that's great. And in terms of those examples of the stories, can you give me an indication of what stories that you get sent that you don't really want to cover, or won't cover? You talked about the resident focus on a particular resident, and that's not the right story for you as a publication. But what kinds of stories are you advising? Look, just don't send me that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So as I said, the resident focus stuff, it can work if it's the right story. Like I said, if somebody's gardening, there's just a resident that's taken up gardening, is heartwarming. I do like it, but it's just not for us, unfortunately. Yeah. They can work if it's maybe there's a celebrity involved. Celebrity's gone to a care home. There's lots of nice photos of the celebrity, maybe a celebrity chef doing cooking lessons with the residents, stuff like that. It can work. But as for what specifically does not work, I would say there's that stuff in particular. Similar stories as well, the more personal ones when it comes to staff as well, again, might be lovely, like heartwarming stuff, but this registered manager has just gone on a hike by herself and raised a few £100. It's great news, it's a great story, it's just not as business focused as we would like it to be.
I see.
It's more personal.
Yeah, I understand. And tell me, if I'm a care provider and there's business related stories. Now, I know that if I'm a reasonable sized business care provider, I may probably making new appointments fairly frequently. I could probably come up with a story for you, yeah, once a week. But my question is, how, if I was a care provider, I was really, really, really keen to get that regular and ongoing coverage. And of course, there are a whole number, as we know, different other care sector media as well as the national media we touched on. And let me be clear, everyone listening, is the same approach as we're talking about here with Care Home Professional and Sam will be applying to every other media. One thing that they are looking for is a story. And you notice that Sam from the top said, what we are interested in is a business related story, an expert opinion around wages and how you're managing your business as a care provider, about guest columns, about providing your expertise. Pitching that to Sam will be a similar process for all other media. Yes, it may be, for example, that the Financial Times or the Guardian or the Telegraph may be looking for a different angle, but if you understand what that angle might be that particular media is looking for, you may well have that within your care provider to get that coverage. So yes, it may be different and sometimes it may be harder because of the reasons that Sam's talked about, which is there's only so many stories the national press will write about the care sector, and you have to be much more forensic and detailed and focused in how you pitch. But the processes we're talking about are very, very similar. But going back, if I can, Sam, to that question of like, how often will you, as an editor, reasonably accept a story or a pitch from a particular care provider? How often is that feasible? Is it feasible?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we're not going to be publishing, say X care provider, does this. We're not going to be publishing a story from one care provider, every day of the week. Partly because that would look like they've got some sort of deal with this, and people do get a little bit tired of samey news, whatever that
I imagine
sameness
so,
comes
yeah.
from. But also, just there's no way that one company is going to have that much relevant news. So I wouldn't put a specific limit on it. It would more just because you might have two brilliant stories 2 days in a row,
Yeah.
and that would be absolutely fine. But it's more knowing what is the right news and what is big news, because that's going to naturally limit how often you send stuff in anyway.
Yeah. Uh,
Just before we move on from it, I
yeah.
wanted to say, just while it's in my mind, another great piece of content that you can send in. It doesn't have to. It's not news from your company per se, and it's quite an easy one to put together as well. And it's just really, really useful for me. And I actually used a story using these I'll explain it now, but using this morning was my top story, and it's literally just quotes about big news in the sector at the moment. So if a story is just broken, like we've got the story that I think the past 3 days, my top story has been on this on our email newsletter. And it's the hospitals discharging patients to care homes and the 200 million fund that's going towards that. I went round a few care providers and asked them for, I'd speak to one of their marketing people. I would send over a few questions for their CEO, for example, just to answer on that topic. It's really, really good to have the perspective of the care providers on topics like that. And I'll mention that the organisations in the sector, so National Care Forum, Care England, people like that, they tend to automatically send over comment from Martin Green, from Vic Brainer, from whoever it may be. Care providers don't do that so often. And it's for many reasons. I'm not saying that they're at fault for doing that, but that if somebody would start doing that, then they would be featured on Care Home Professional a lot. Because you almost want to hear from care providers more than you want to hear from a Martin Green.
Yeah, understood. I mean, as good as and valuable as Martin Green is, there are many other care providers who are, right there on the coalface, so to speak. So
yeah, absolutely. I mentioned news getting a bit samey, and that's one way that it could get a bit samey is Martin Green is somewhat a spokesperson for the sector.
Yeah.
So we do hear from him a lot. So as famous as he is relative to the care
Mm.
sector, his name, might not always pull in thousands of viewers or readers just because people see his name in headlines very,
Yeah.
very often.
Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah.
if I can say, without even being specific, if I can put a quote from a care provider in that headline, it might be really, really good at drawing in a wider readership.
How would you recommend care providers send their stories to you? Via email? Roughly how many words? And also,
Yeah.
can you talk about the value of photos?
Yes, absolutely. You've almost read my mind there in terms of some of the preparation I did for this. So sending it across, like I said, email is the best way. I'm probably similar to most journalists. Don't have much time on my hands. I'm terrible at responding to emails, and because my inbox is so full. But you can trust that I have read your email. If it didn't make it onto the website that day, don't be offended. There's many reasons that could be, but just keep trying. I've sort of created a little check sheet here of the best ways to send it across to maximize your chances of
Oh, I
making
love that. Can you
the
put that?
website.
Are you able to go through that now? And also maybe we can put it in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned earlier making sure the story's relevant. That's one part. But you've got to send across everything we need. You mentioned the importance of photos. If I'm looking at an email, subject line, press release, probably something more specific after that, and I go in and there's no photo, or there's the wrong kind of photo, like a company logo, already a little bit like, this news better be good because otherwise I'm probably not going to use it. Just because I have to spend the extra few minutes finding a copyright-free photo online that I can use that's relevant for, and that does sometimes take a bit of time.
Yeah.
So we want the right photo. We want it, if it's for online, the dimensions don't need to be anything crazy, something like 800. I put my photos in 800 by 550 pixels. Doesn't need to be a massive photo file. Preferably it's a JPEG. But the sort of photo you would want is quite often of people or a person or a building. So even if it's like an NHS related story, I will sometimes just put a photo of the NHS, would you call it a logo, I guess, on an NHS hospital. Even better, it might be if it's a story about a specific care home or hospital, you might put a photo of that building if you can find one. Photos that are very obviously relevant to the story. That's something we really need. Very, very similar vein. We always need quotes. That's almost more of a no-no, is to send across a press release with no quotes in it. As a journalist, it just makes you look a bit bad if you've not got any quotes. And obviously I can come back to you and ask you for those quotes, but the immediacy of the way we work with the news, sometimes it's just there's another press release over there that does have quotes in it. I'm going to go with that one instead. So I would say send quotes. I would say it doesn't need to be much. Might be a couple of short paragraphs, even like a couple of sentences. So it'd probably be under 100 words of quotes, and then maybe above that in the press release, ideally a couple of 100 words, concise but detailed on what the story is. You want to cover what it is, who's involved, where it's happening, when it's happening, why. But the other thing on quotes, before I forget, always include somebody to credit the quote to. I need a full name and a job title. Unfortunately, you can't say Spring Up PR said this because it just doesn't really make sense. A company can't speak. A company can't say words. I need to say Adam James said this. So that's a
I'm sure it'll be a good quote, Sam, if it comes.
I don't doubt it, Adam. I don't doubt it. What else have I got? I think the only other thing is, again, send it by email. You quite often get it'll always be an external. I don't want to upset you. I don't want to insult you either. It'll always be an external PR that will do this, but they'll call you to tell you that they've got a press release for you, and it just always ends up being a case of me saying, "All right, send it over by email then, and have a look." And it's just those little wastes of time that that sort of maybe steer you in the direction of another press release that's just been sent across without a phone call. As petty as it sounds. So
well, I'd love to speak to you about this because I tell my team, and this is what we do the whole time, the riches are in the follow-up. And let me go into the details here because Sam, and we're talking about all media here. If I don't hear if I send you a good story, my team and myself, we only send good stories. So if that's that's the ethos and philosophy that we set ourselves. So therefore, and I'm curious to know what you think here, is that if you don't respond to our pitch, it could be a variety of reasons. And this is what I tell my team. A, you didn't because journalists don't respond anyway, that's fine, it's normal. But like, let's say there was no coverage for that story that you pitched, but you know, as a professional doing a pitching, that you feel you sent a good story. So why did Sam or XY journalist not cover the story? It may be because, the editor or journalist you're pitching the story did not think it was as good a story as you think it was. B, that, they're thinking about it, they may use it later. C, they don't even remember seeing the email. Yeah. D, it went into junk. E, Sam or XY journalist was actually really busy or on holiday, so that's another reason why they didn't see it. So there's a multitude of reasons why that pitch that a PR person like myself, this is what I tell my team, would not get the coverage. But I tell my team is that if you're sending a good story, you need, and it's for whatever reason it's not published, or you want to know whether the journalist is going to cover it or not, follow up to check that they have got it, because of all those reasons that they may not have. Now, I always tell my team, and this is what I always did, if I was following up with you, Sam, I'd say, look, I sent you this story about how one care provider is building 5 new care homes within 6 months. Did you get that story? And you would go either no, or yeah, I like that, or nah, yeah, I got it, but it's not right for us. But or you could say no, and this has happened many times. Oh no, I've not got that. Can you resend it, please?
Yeah.
And therefore, when I talk about the riches are in the follow-up, I now know that you, Sam or XY journalist, has not published that story. In this case, it's because you didn't receive it, or else you could say, and this sometimes happens, that story is not quite right for us, and I'll tell you why. And at least I now know, as a PR pro, I've got the information as to, well, okay, great. Well, I thought it was a good story. Help me out here. Was it? Why do you think it was a good story? If you've got time.
Yeah.
But I guess probably the question, I'd like to hear how that resonates with you, Sam.
Yeah. No, you're bang on. There's a couple of reasons in there in your list of reasons that definitely warrant some sort of follow-up. The only thing I would say is that you don't want to overdo it. So you don't want to risk becoming, and I honestly speak more about PRs in the sector that I used to cover, which I don't mind saying is jewelry, the jewelry sector, which is trade again. I'm speaking much more about PRs there, but some of them tended to overdo it with the follow-ups to the point of, and it's so petty, but to the point of being a bit annoying, and that maybe it wouldn't affect everyone in the same way, but I feel like it's probably human nature. That makes me less likely to cover somebody's stories if I'm getting an initial email and then 3 follow-up emails. If I'm getting a phone call, then an email, then a phone call. And if it's on every single story that I get from them as well. I can remember saying to one PR, I was like, try to be as polite as possible, but I was like, I don't need the follow-up emails. You can trust I've seen it, it's fine. And he was saying he is sort of contracted to do a follow-up on everything that he sends across. It does just risk, simply put, becoming a little bit aggravating. And so I would say that would be my recommendation to a PR, would be maybe to only follow up after you rethought the story and thought, was that one that really needs a follow-up, that I really think, they must have missed this, because that's a great one.
Yeah.
I would just say take a second before the follow-up. Don't automatically follow up.
Great. Okay, great, Sam. Thank you. And so we're talking about the follow-up, we're talking about the photos, we're talking about the length of story, news release that they send. I would just like to talk to you about videos. Does video come into play now with pitching and for you and Care Home Professional?
Not too much in pitching, actually. Not too much in the sense of pitching. It used to more when I was writing about jewelry. It doesn't come very much in care homes, but as a general rule, I could say that I don't know if this is just symptom of the website we use, which is WordPress, but if we are to get sent a video file, it doesn't usually work very easily, at least for us to upload it to WordPress.
I see, right.
The easiest way for us to include a video is if it is on your YouTube channel.
Yes.
And that is a simple, take the URL, take that link, chuck it in, just write in with all the copy that I'm writing in WordPress, and then it's there for me to use. That is really easy and becomes really appealing then to readers as well, because I can say, video, whatever's happened, or video of whatever, and people want to go and watch it then, and we both get views from that. So that would be my tip in terms of videos. But yeah, I don't get much video content as such related to the K sector.
Yeah, and just to add there, for what you're talking about there is that if you're getting into the realms of SEO and well, particularly SEO, to have what's called a high domain authority link from a media outlet such as Care Home Professional does carry a lot of weight. Are Care Home Professional stories featured in Google News? I think they are. Is that correct?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
which is another key thing for anyone listening. It's like you put a story out on your website, it's just content. You have a story out on Care Home Professional or other news outlets, it has what's called a higher domain authority and is going to be picked up on Google News, which, if people are searching under your name as a company, means it's much more likely to be picked up, and it's useful for your online reputation and online profile.
Absolutely, yeah, and we're always thinking about how to get those stories read the most as well. That is sort of what we specialize in, is things like SEO and headlines that sort of catch the eye. So yeah, that's my goal every day, is to get as many clicks as possible on my contributors' stories, like your listeners. I want their stories to be read as much as possible, and to sort of portray the K sector in a good light as much as possible as well.
What are the readership numbers at the moment in digital?
I think we're in the region of 30 to 40,000 a month. Yeah, that's what I know off the top of my head. I know I don't know how much our newsletter goes out to. I think it's maybe 4,000 people in the K sector.
Yeah.
And we've got push notifications as well that pop up on your computer screen, and I know that goes out to 17,000, which is pretty good.
Wonderful, great. This is great. So a lot of information, top insights here from Sam. So if you want to make sure that you get press coverage, and again, I do repeat, the general tips and information that Sam's giving here are relevant to, the principles are relevant to any media that's editorial. And before I set up Spring Up PR, I was actually a journalist, freelance journalist for 15 years, pitching and selling my stories to editors like Sam. And I did that for a living, so I got to know pretty much the best ways to do it. So Sam, look, is there anything that you've not covered that you feel would benefit our listeners?
Yeah, just the one thing I wanted to sort of touch on was, and we almost touched on it just now, was sort of like I was saying, we do have the sort of expertise and knowledge and the desire as well to publish your stories, paint the K sector in sort of as good a light as possible, and get as much viewership as possible on those stories. And the only time sort of, as you know, the relationship between a journalist and the people that we're covering, the interviewees, stuff like that. The only time that's ever brought at all is sometimes people don't like headlines and stuff like that. The way they've been portrayed and things like that. And I've just been thinking about it a lot recently, and I think it boils down to, a lot of people always say the news is very negative and stuff like that. It's always the negative stories. We don't see the positive ones. That is I think something that can be leveled slightly more at national press. But B, comes down a lot to the readership and what the readership wants to see. Because as much as people like to say that the news is negative, I could publish some of these statistics. If you looked behind the scenes at what stories get clicks, if I'm writing, like I said earlier, people might have been wondering why the gardening care home resident story was not relevant. As much as it's to do with, it's not business related as such, it also doesn't get the clicks. So there's a reason when, if we conduct an interview and it has quite an explosive headline, I did write down an example earlier, lost it in my many notes, but there's a reason that we will go for these sort of explosive headlines, and it does benefit you, because it's sort of the difference between, I'll try and think of one off the top of my head now. If I put Care Home Executive celebrates 10 years at company, that might get a couple of hundred clicks over a day or two. If I put Care Home Executive goes off on government for doing whatever, could get probably anywhere between 3 and 10 times as many clicks.
Mm-hmm.
People tend to, when it's about them or their company, they tend to not love the negative headlines. But I promise it is beneficial to everybody involved, apart from the government in that instance. It's just a very important part of journalism that benefits all of us. And as much as we've been talking today about sort of marketing or promotion, at least, there is sort of the journalism side of things as well, and sort of exposing things within the sector and things like that. But yeah, it is always our goal to portray the care sector as positively as possible. But that might be why sometimes the more dramatic, sensational headlines come across and make people think, oh, the news is really negative.
Sure.
So, yeah, there's just a little insight into the way things work.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Sam. So finally, if anyone wants to reach out and contact you, how can they do that?
Yeah, again, so email address is always the best place to go to. It's sam.lewis, Lewis is Lewis, at itppromedia.com.
Perfect. Sam, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah, no, thanks very much, Adam. Lovely speaking to you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.